Hello, bruvs. We're back with I Never Believed in Ghosts Until 100 Real Life Encounters collected by the editors of USA Weekend. And we move to the second one. Let me turn the light on. Séance by B. Elaine Story. White candles were lit to keep bad spirits from intruding, and black plastic had been taped over the windows. With the exception of a few curious newcomers, everyone expected nothing less than communication with the dead. Each progressive seance had produced enough coincidences to make even a doubting Thomas a believer. The room was filled with teenagers. News had spread around town, and parties that had started out as typical teenage get togethers with the added fascination of the supernatural as entertainment had become so intriguing and so mystifying that no one wanted to stop the seances until much more had been accomplished. After all, everyone was just having fun. On this particular night, the group decided to call back a guy named Nicky, who had died a few years earlier from leukemia at the age of 27. He really had no claim to fame. He simply happened to be dead. He had been friends with some members of the audience, and almost everyone else had known him or knew of him because we lived in a small town. The main practitioners of the seance placed their hands on the Ouija board's dial. Different kids from the crowd asked questions. The first few were simple and factual. What was your wife's name? What year did you graduate from high school? The few people who knew Nicky well posed questions of a more specific nature, with answers only the questioner would know. Every question was answered correctly and was followed by a silence from the amazed audience. One skeptic asked Nicky to give a physical sign as evidence that a connection had truly been made. The Ouija dial spelled out that they would receive a sign at midnight, and hands jerked away from the board as people looked at each other with eyes sick with the joy of fear. A certain energy was shared by all in the room, an energy that bound them together. At midnight, the sound of a loud, rumbling motorcycle racing down the street outside broke the silence. The teenagers scrambled out of their chairs and rushed to the windows, but no one saw a bike. That was a Harley Davidson. Nicky owned the baddest Harley in the county. We checked each other's facial expressions. Some of the girls unconsciously covered their mouths with their hands. Others tried to offer some logical explanation to ears already prejudiced against reason. What they all had witnessed, though, through sight and sound, was all they needed to satisfy the obvious conclusion, even if the obvious was beyond explanation. Still, one determined guest had to make it vocal. Ask it if that was Nicky's bike. No one was surprised when the Ouija dial flew upward to yes. The dial then started moving without the prompting of a question and began to spell out this message: "Meet me at my grave." For some, this was too much to consider, but for most, it was an invitation to poesk to refuse. Pardon my ignorance there. It was as if the final answer lay at the Concord Methodist churchyard. Few hesitated to jump into their cars and drive the 8 miles across narrow, winding roads to the destination suggested by the Ouija. Upon arrival at the cemetery, the crowd set out for Nicky's grave. Even though it was midsummer, there was something chilling in the damp, foggy air, something that lashed their faces and whispered in their ears. The incessant sound of crickets became a monotonous torment as no one dared to utter a sound. given the solemnity of their purpose. When the first group came within sight of the grave, they froze in their steps, either from disbelief or from facing cold reality. No one came within 20 feet of Nicky's final resting place, because those who looked... I don't know why my flash shut off since the phone's not hot. It's a sign it's Nicky. When the first group came within sight of the grave, they froze in their steps, either from disbelief or from facing cold reality. No one came within 20 feet of Nicky's final resting place, because those who looked through the moonlit haze saw a dim, shadowy figure sitting on Nicky's tombstone, arms outstretched to greet them. They ran back to their cars, slipping on wet grass, panting, their hearts pounding. Days later, the parents of some of the kids casually remarked how strange it was that they had seen a tall, thin man walking down Chapel Avenue around midnight, wearing a gray pinstripe suit, not a soup. Nicky had been buried in a gray pinstripe suit. Terrifying.